Over the weekend, Democrats really handled the Brett Kavanaugh vote, I think, with great aplomb, dignity, poise. Folks on the left really, I think, showed tremendous maturity when they realized that Brett Kavanaugh is actually going to be on the Supreme Court. For those who missed it, Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed on Saturday by a 50-48 vote. And Democrats responded in their typically moderated and, I think, modulated fashion. It was really good to watch. It was good to see the country come together after such a rough time. I mean, like here is what happened at the Supreme Court immediately as Kavanaugh was being confirmed inside. For those who can't actually see this, there are people who are legitimately standing there beating on the 13-ton bronze doors of the Supreme Court. My favorite is this lady who's trying to pry the door open. She, like Frodo trying to get into the Mines of Moria without the actual passcode. She's just there trying to pry open the doors with her bare hands, though the doors are going to part before her. It's pretty astonishing stuff. Obviously, people really reacting well to all of this. But I don't want to make it sound like it's just, members of an angry mob who are involved in being an angry mob. I mean, they are, but it's more than that, right? It's some of the elites in our society. We're talking about high-ranking Democratic Party people who have completely lost their mind. I mean, legitimately and completely lost their mind over Brett Kavanaugh joining the Supreme Court in much the way they lost their mind over Donald Trump being elected in the first place. So the Democrats have indeed turned into an angry mob. And you can see how much of an angry mob they've turned into when we get to what policies they are proposing, because it's pretty astonishing. But here's President Trump hitting the nail on the head. As I've said before, the president is a hammer. Sometimes he hits a nail. Sometimes he hits a baby. Well, yesterday, he hit a nail, and it was satisfying because he said what is correct here. The only thing Democrats had to do, honestly, when Trump was elected, all Democrats had to do was not be crazy. That's all they had to do. They have failed dramatically in that task of not being crazy. Instead, they've decided to go full-blown crazy. Here is President Trump pointing that out.
In their quest for power, the radical Democrats have turned into an angry mob. You saw that today with the screaming and the shouting. Not from the 200 people or less. You know what? Those people, they couldn't fit in the front row. Look what we have here tonight.
Okay, Trump is exactly right about all of this. Now, what do the folks on the left want to do about this? Well, they want to do two things. One, they want to come up with systemic ways to change the system. And two, they want to try out a war on women narrative. The war on women narrative is their great hope that they can start a war of the sexes. They tried this in 2016. They said that there was a war on women, and Hillary Clinton was a representative of women in this fight. They're hoping that because President Trump is alienating to a lot of particularly suburban women, that they can glom onto that, and then they can combine that with enthusiasm for the Me Too movement and use that to club Republicans into submission on a political level. We'll get to the war on women narrative in a second. But first, what they want to do is they want to radically change the system of American government. They're full-blown members of the media. I'm talking about Washington Post reporters today who are shocked to discover that the Senate of the United States is not represented by population. They are shocked to discover that, in fact, each state has 2 senators. And then they realize that, wait, Montana has fewer people than New York, which means the Senate isn't representative. Oh, my God. They're literally realizing this, like, right now. It's like, I don't know where they've been for, the past 300 years in this country. But, yeah, I mean, this is actually a case that they are making. So the media have discovered a few things that they are upset about. After 2016, they discovered they didn't like the Electoral College very much because Hillary lost. And now they've discovered that there is such a thing called the United States Senate. And that the United States Senate, believe it or not, actually represents a different population than the House of Representatives. Now, originally, the Constitution said that the Senate was not even to be selected by popular vote within the states. Originally, the state legislatures selected their own senators, which was the correct move. That's the way it should have worked, because that meant that there was even another layer between the population and the Senate. See, the founders were actually quite worried about mob rule. They were quite worried about the idea of pure democracy because they figured that demagoguery could win over broad swaths of the population, and that would enable all sorts of bad things to happen to minorities inside the United States. This is what they were worried about. And so they set up a system of checks and balances to provide for the rights of states while ensuring that if there was overwhelming support for a measure, that all of that would be able to happen anyway. But Aaron Blake over at the Washington Post, in shocking news, breaking news, he's the senior political reporter at the Washington Post. This is breaking news, guys, hot off the wires. Quote, people are suddenly deciding that population disparities render the Senate undemocratic. Upon ratification, Virginia had 12 times as many people as Delaware. Disparities are bigger now, but they very much existed when our founders decided on this system. So Aaron Blake is obviously actually saying the truth here, but there are a bunch of people in the media who have been suddenly calling on folks to get rid of the Senate. I'm not kidding. I'm looking for all the tweets right now, but basically they're making the case that the Senate needs to go away, or alternatively, they're making the case instead that the Supreme Court ought to be packed. So my favorite is Democrats suggesting that Republicans undemocratically got Brett Kavanaugh through the Senate when Republicans had the votes in the Senate. Somehow that's undemocratic. And now they're saying their solution to the undemocratic nature of the movement of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court requires them to add more justices to the Supreme Court in violation of the Constitution. This is from the New York Times today. The bitter partisan fury that engulfed Justice Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court confirmation was the fiercest battle in a political war over the judiciary that has been steadily intensifying since the Senate rejected Judge Robert Bork in 1987. But an even greater conflagration may be coming. This confirmation vote will not necessarily be the last word on Brett Kavanaugh serving a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court, said Brian Fallon, executive director of the liberal group Demand Justice and the top spokesman for Hillary's 2016 campaign. So what exactly are they talking about? Some have gone as far as proposing, if Democrats were to retake control of Congress and the White House in 2020 or after, expanding the number of justices on the court to pack it with liberals, or trying to impeach, remove, and replace Brett Kavanaugh. So good news. The Democrats are taking this all extraordinarily well. They just want to change the system of government completely. They want to get rid of the Senate, and they also want to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court because they couldn't win an election. So well done to Democrats.